Welcome to the Career Studio podcast, where we boil down the noise and focus on the core concepts essential for building an energizing career you love, one that is simply an extension of who you are and how you want to live your life. Anyone can do it. It's just a matter of knowing what to focus on. Hi, my guest today is Sarah Sternberg. Sarah began her career as a strategist in advertising and now works in philanthropy in the service of gender equity, figuring out how foundations and charities can best spend their money to achieve gender progress. She currently works at Movember Foundation, thinking about how we can get men to adopt more progressive masculinities. She lives in North London and outside of her work spends endless hours reading Going on a Bear Hunt with her 2-year-old daughter. Together, Sarah and I discussed how she restructured her career to suit her strengths, interests, and priorities, detaching her happiness from finding a new role and learning to create it now in the midst of her own evolution, unwinding from people-pleasing and how this can get you off track during the interview process, creating a network around her of her peers that will always support her and makes her feel grounded, and the importance of connecting to your emotional world as part of your work life to help you make good decisions. So let's dive in. Sarah, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it feels exciting that we're doing this almost a year after we worked together, because I think that often so much of the work that we do then solidifies over that time and insights come in and so it's often a really interesting place and time to meet people at. So yeah, excited to dig in.
Likewise. Yeah, it does. It feels both like it's been a long time and also like no time at all has passed. So, but I think time is probably going to be one of the things I'm going to be talking about a lot in this conversation. So, yeah, an appropriate place to start maybe.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, maybe actually where I'd love to start is for you to just paint a picture of how you were feeling professionally and personally, before we started working together. Just, I think describing that really helps people sometimes find their own self in that description. So maybe you could paint a picture of what was going on for you, and then we can jump off of that.
For sure. I think so we started working together in August 2021. And at that time, I think, kind of 9 months into a maternity leave that was soon to be ending. So I was returning to work in September, and I'd had a really complicated pregnancy and quite like a difficult early babyhood with my daughter, who, is fine now, but it had been quite a scary time. And during that time, I think my work had been a really helpful anchor and had felt quite kind of solid. And then when I was on maternity leave, I found out that my boss was leaving my job, or leaving my employer. He would be leaving really before I got a chance to return to work. So we would be sort of ships in the night. And I remember finding that out in July and just feeling so adrift, so at sea, kind of so worried about the prospect of returning to work, which, already felt like it might be quite freighted and quite hard. And then suddenly thinking, my boss has gone, why is he leaving? And what am I going to do? And what does this mean for me? And actually, how am I really feeling about returning to work in its totality? And I had a bit of a history, or as I kind of painted it myself, a bit of a history of parachuting out of jobs very quickly, of sort of, in my own words, I think at the time, feeling like I was quite princessy and quite sort of fussy. And as soon as things got difficult, sort of pressing eject and jumping out. And I was really worried that I was going to do that again. I was like, this is a stressful, kind of panic inducing situation. If I'm not careful, I'm just going to jump out of this job and jump into another one. But I now know from previous experience that doesn't always lead you to the right place. And so I really knew that I needed to be careful and thoughtful and considerate about this next phase of my career and kind of give it deliberate consideration. And I thought the only way to do that was to invest in the time and space and relationship of coaching to do it.
Yeah, I think that's so relatable, both on the kind of coming back from maternity leave, feeling adrift, feeling uncertain with how that's going to land, what it's going to be like, especially after your first baby. And equally, that sentiment of or experience of as soon as something isn't working, pressing eject, right? That knee jerk reaction to this environment isn't working. I need to find something else. I think that that is such a common reaction for people and really often what gets us into trouble.
Mm. I think it's just it's making the decision or trying to make decisions when you are yourself in quite a kind of panicky state. And I think I recognized that I didn't want to do that, but I also didn't know how I would do anything other than that unless I
Yeah.
got some help to do it differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So maybe now contrast that feeling or experience with how you're feeling now or have been feeling over the past year professionally.
I think it's been I mean, I now feel great. I feel really calm actually. And I suppose it's interesting to talk about it as feelings as opposed to, where you are, what decisions you've made or not made, because I was feeling really panicky and now I'm feeling really calm and really trusting, I guess, trusting of myself, where previously I felt like I really couldn't trust myself to make the right decision. I now feel like I really can trust myself. And I suppose I feel like I've had experiences over the last year where I felt like I've made really good decisions, where I feel like I've developed, I suppose, the techniques and capabilities based on some of the work we did together to be able to, yeah, make the right calls when I need to and trust my sort of gut, not have the fear that I'm going to sort of make a reckless decision as I was feeling previously. But yeah, feeling much calmer, much more centered, much more trusting of myself.
I got chills when you say that because that's really oftentimes when I talk about my business, it's really, I say really what it's about. I have these 4 fundamental things and we're going to talk about those in more specificity. But really, when you boil all of that down, it's really about learning how to trust yourself.
Mm,
Because if you are tuned into who you are and what you're about and what feels right and what you need, you can always make the decision that's right for you. And it's not necessarily about describing the result in a few of like, I have this job and this title and this is what I'm doing. The result is as long as you can trust yourself and that trust comes from within, you always have a map, right? And you always know where you're going. And so I think it's really beautiful that that's how you chose to explain
oh, well, yeah, that's how I feel.
it. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. What do I want to say? I think maybe we can start by talking a little bit about your brand and kind of owning who you are and why you think where you are is a good fit for who you are and your priorities right now.
Sure. And actually it's interesting to sort of to go there because I think, one of the things that happened while we were working together was, I was feeling unhappy with the role that I was doing at the time, and I wasn't feeling that represented by my organization. I think that's changed in the last year, and that kind of has to do with actually, me getting clearer on who I am and also the organization going on a bit of a journey too. But during the time that we were working together, I was sort of exploring other places I could work, other options, and found, while we were working together, I sort of went through an interview process for a very prestigious organization that I had kind of, you know well, it was interesting. I'd always imagined on some level maybe I would want to work there. But I remember the first thing we talked about when we talked about the opportunity was how it didn't necessarily feel like it was on brand for me. It felt like it was maybe a bit more kind of stiff upper lip or straight laced. And I think it was really illuminating, I think, to recognize that I could be both a sort of creative and analytical thinker and also be someone who was, very serious about social impact and gender equality, which is the field I'm in. But that in order to work in that space, I didn't have to be a kind of, Oxbridge Business School, international development, wonky politico person. I could be who I was, which was a sort of, yes, strategic and yes, analytical, but also fundamentally more creative, more dynamic, more kind of imaginative, I guess. And that it didn't need to be the case that I didn't need to pretend, I guess, that I either had capabilities that I didn't have or that I didn't have some of the strengths that I do have. And actually, one of the things that was very interesting about going through that interview process is that I really, based on the work that we'd done together, I decided to make what I had perhaps previously thought of as a weakness, which was, oh, I'm a bit too creative, or I've come from a bit of a different background from all these other people. I thought of that as a weakness. And I think my instinct before working with you would have been to probably hide those things. And in fact, I then decided to make it the center of my application. I was like, this is who I am, and this is how I think about the world, and this is how, this is how I've been able to do this work to date really effectively. It's not something to shy away from. It's actually something to kind of shout about and be proud of. And that's been, I think, one of the things that I've carried through, and that has actually been a bit of a lightning rod for me in terms of assessing future opportunities, both in my existing organization and then, when other things have come to me, it's been the work of this place might totally chime with my values, but if the people aren't my kind of people, then it's not going to speak to me.
I love what you said about what you used to think was a weakness is actually now you're flipping that on its head and owning that, because this is often the pivotal 180 that we need to do to create this alignment and this self-trust. I think oftentimes we're looking out at the world and feeling like there's a certain standard, and everyone's standard of what they think they should be or what their CV should look like or the types of strengths and experience they should have. Everyone's version of that is slightly different based on, what they're interested in and the environments that they're in. But if you are in that situation when you're like, oh, I should be more XYZ, this is how we get out of alignment, is because we're saying, I need to be like someone else, or I need to change who I am in order to create the career I love. But actually, if you own who you are and with the experience you've had and use that as your front foot, right, that's when you're really going to thrive. I mean, for me, I talk a lot about this in my content, but I spent a long time wanting to be analytical and quantitative. And, I did an MBA with thinking that that's what I needed. I needed to go be a management consultant. And when I dropped all of that and really said, I'm great at building relationships, I love thinking about personal development, and just owned that really allowed me to create the career I have now, where I feel really free and energized and not stressed. And like I get to show up every day to work and do something that I feel inherently good at. And so I think that's such an important point. Like if people are feeling like you should be, this is like an alarm bell. It's a red flag. I mean, that you're thinking about it in the wrong way.
Totally.
Yeah. And you've really kind of recreated a role for yourself at Movember that I believe is kind of helping you do more of the stuff that you would like to be doing.
Absolutely. And I think actually there's also, I sound like a broken record. I'm like, this came from our coaching conversation, but I remember you said, I think it was actually probably one of our first conversations, and I was really worried about returning to work, and I was really worried about workload and being asked to do things I didn't want to do, being asked to sort of carry some of the work. My boss who'd left was carry some of his work. I thought, oh, I don't want to do that. And you were like, well, why don't you just write down what you want to do and maybe also what you don't want to do, and why don't you just talk about it with your boss? And I was like, what? Like, how could I, I can't, like, it was just, I was in the spinning and catastrophizing, but I did do it. I did write it down. And one of the first things I did when I returned was I scheduled a meeting to talk about, all the work and who was going to do what in the team and, what I was prepared to do. And it was completely fine. And it worked. And it meant that I returned to work with so much more ease and more confidence actually in myself to then get what I wanted. So then when it came to actually, at a later date, really figuring out, well, what is it that I'm enjoying about working here and the opportunities, and what are some of the things I would like to change, I did exactly the same thing. I sort of wrote down what I wanted to do and had in my mind, a firm sense of what I perhaps didn't want to do. And I just talked about it with my boss and then with my boss's boss. And then I got to do it. And it was really easy. And I'm sure it's not always like that, but I think it was such an illuminating, like liberating way that you framed the fact that, well, it's up to you. It's your decision. Your phrase of "you're in the driver's seat" was one of the things that I think I've said to numerous people since about career coaching, because it was, I think, the thing that, but I'm sure not all organizations are the same. I'm sure there would be, I might have faced more barriers with different people working with me, but it's also like, well, why wouldn't you try? Like, if they'd said no, then that would also have been very useful. I'd have been like, okay, well, I can't do what I want to do here, so I guess I'm going to have to go. Whereas what happened, luckily for me, was I did get to do what I wanted to do. And over the last year, thinking back to, when we first started working together, and when we stopped, we stopped working together a year ago. So it's sort of, it's 18 months probably since we started, and then a year since we stopped. In that year since we stopped working together, I can see how much I've grown in terms of what I've been exposed to professionally. Like, my sort of hard skills and my soft skills have massively increased. And that's because I asked to do this role that I'd kind of half made up, but thought was needed and thought I'd be good at. And I would not have asked to do it if we hadn't worked together. So I sort of feel like I can draw a really clear red thread from you just saying, well, why don't you just ask? Like it was the easiest thing in the world. And I was like, what? I can't ask. And then I did ask, and it was great. So I think there's a sort of, there's a way in which I can really see the direct impact of the coaching on what I'm doing now, and the fact that it suits me so much better than what I was doing before, and feels like a real, I've really grown in the role that I've been in. But also, I think the attitude shift's been the thing that I'll carry with me forever, which is, you can just ask, in the next role or in the next role. That will now be my philosophy. I'll be thinking, if I'm not happy, if it isn't working for me, the thing to try and do is take positive action to change it by just being really clear and direct and asking for what I want.
Yeah. I mean, brilliant. It's so brilliant. And I'm so pleased to hear all of that. And, you've been lucky to work in well, not lucky, but you acknowledge it yourself in the way that you responded, but you work in an organization that was amenable to
Yes.
your feedback, which is brilliant. Good organizations, good people leaders will always want to put people in the roles that are best fit for their strengths, interests, and priorities. And
Mm.
if you're in an organization where people don't recognize the value of putting the right people in the right places, right, then you're not in the right space, right? That's not a sustainable work environment. It's not a sustainable team. And to your point, it's the signal. It's equally valuable information, because this place is not a long-term solution for you. So brilliant.
It reminds me a bit. I know you've used like dating analogies before in your content, and I do feel it's a bit like that. It's like, if someone isn't getting back to you, if you've reached out to them in a romantic sense and they don't come back, or like they dilly dally, it's like, well, wouldn't it just be better to know sooner rather than later? Like, wouldn't it be better to know that, like, they're not interested and this isn't going anywhere, and then you can move on? It's like, what's scary about knowing? There is a lot that is scary about knowing, but you will be able to move on with your life so much faster, either when they say yes, I do want to date you, or I do want to give you the role that you want, or no, I don't want to give you the role you want, or no, I don't want to date you. It's like, okay, well, great, have the information, move on.
Absolutely. I think thanks for bringing it back to that. I love that topic. I would equally say that, some dilly-dallying or treading water or not getting back to you clearly is also just a form of rejection, right? It's less
Yes,
clear,
yes.
but it's also a sign of no. So, yeah. I Okay, so maybe we can talk a little bit about, get a very open question around, to create this reality you have now of trusting yourself, of creating this role that's really good fit for your strengths and interests and priorities, where you're growing and learning. What beliefs did you struggle with, or what did you have to get over in order to create that?
I think one of them, and I sort of mentioned this at the top of our conversation around time, I think one of them was a really weird, like, now I think about it, I think it's crazy, but I think it's really common, and it was really affecting me, which was this idea of only having a specific amount of time in which to make career and life decisions, like setting arbitrary deadlines in my own head. So when we first started working together, I said to myself, okay, well, I'm going to invest this time and money now in coaching, with the expectation that in 6 months' time, when this is over, I will have a new job. And that's kind of why I'm doing it. It's to get a new job. And I think loads of people probably have a similar sort of motivation, a similar idea of like, well, it's worth it now because I'll spend the time now and then I'll have achieved this very concrete thing at the end of that time. And I think I had a similar idea also of, I really want to, and when, that didn't happen. I did not end the coaching, cycle and have a new job. And so during the coaching, I think I really had to let go of that idea, and that idea, the idea that the time had to then equate with a certain sort of direction of progress or a certain milestone of progress and a certain sense of success. And then I think that was actually a much bigger theme in my life, which was about wanting to have achieved certain things by certain times, wanting to have, I guess, ticked boxes and a sense of certainty. And as time passed and, I didn't get that, I really struggled, I think, with that, with accepting that, things weren't happening in the timetable that I wanted. And I think one of the things that was hugely illuminating about working together was this recognition that like it's never over. You'll never like, I think what I wanted was you'll do the coaching for 6 months, you'll get a new job, and then like tie it up in a bow. That's life. Like you've done it. Well done. You've done your career challenge now. You've done your career Mount Everest. You've climbed the summit, and then that's it. Whereas I think one of the things that really came through as a theme when we worked together was your career is going to be a long time, and it's going to be a big theme and a big part of your life for the next 40, 50 years. So you will go through experiences and you'll go through periods and cycles of not being happy in what you're doing again. Like this isn't going to be the only time that you're not going to feel aligned with your work. And actually the thing that is more valuable than getting a job in the next 6 months is developing the capabilities and the tools and having the kind of practices and the resources to be able to, the next time this happens, think it through and sort of be more considered, and also to start questioning things like, why do I think I need to have done something in 6 months' time? The world's not going to end. I'm not going to, I'm not going to have lost anything. Like, where does this idea of a deadline come from? And I think it comes from lots of questionable notions about productivity and the idea of myself as a sort of ideal successful good person who's ticking boxes and doing the things they should be doing in the order that they should be doing them. But like fundamentally, the thing that's important about time is recognizing that these times are going to come around again, but also I've got time. Like there's no, what's the rush? And I remember when we were working together, one of the things that really struck me, having just come back from maternity leave, wanting to both spend time with my daughter but also commit time to my work, was realizing that I'm not looking to speed up time and to kind of get to the finish line, which I think was my previous mindset. Actually, a big part of my career has to be about enjoying and making the time I have in whatever I'm doing, even if it's not exactly what I want to be doing, working to optimize that time, working to make it better. I'm not looking to make the time go quicker. I should be looking to make the time better rather than to sort of get to the end, which I feel like I've not expressed particularly clearly as a kind of limiting belief, but it's felt kind of transcendental as a mindset shift because it isn't just about my work, it's about my life, which I think that's something you've said but really hit me when we were talking about time.
Yeah, this idea, just linking it back to your daughter Stella, like you're not waiting for her to become 18 and leave the house, right? You're enjoying the journey of being her mom and like being there every day. And it's not just about these milestones and endpoints. It's about being present and not always looking to the future to feel the way you want to feel.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point because to your, while you didn't end the coaching with a new job, it was the very idea that getting a new job was the answer, which was getting in your way of creating what you wanted, because it was more just focused on, I will feel better when I have a new job. Right. And when we do that, we're constantly hopping from one job to another, and it's not always the right thing for us. But what you've created for yourself is you've gotten really clear on where you want to be professionally, what that means for your needs and in terms of your own development and growth. And you've structured your current role in a way to facilitate that. And you're working on that as well outside of work, right? You are building relationships with people in the spaces that you want to grow into. And that, I mean, I'd love to talk about networking and having conversations, but I think, there is a result. It's just that the result isn't exactly in the package that you thought it was going to be.
Totally.
And there's like that clarity and that direction that you were hoping a new job would give you, you're realizing you can have without a new job.
Absolutely. I think I had a really inaccurate or I had a really idealized notion about jobs, which was I want a job where I'm at home. Like I want my job to be my home. And actually, I think one of the things that I realized in doing the coaching, and particularly actually through the networking side of it, and the kind of, reaching out to my current network, reaching beyond that. I mean, it was amazing. I think, I'm sure other clients of yours have said this, just, people do want to help you. People do want to put you in touch with other people. I think I ended up having about 40 kind of networking conversations during the time we were working together. And I'm now kind of continuously doing it. I'm kind of still meeting or chatting with people, I'd say at least like one a week, and kind of putting other people in touch with. I suppose I like it anyway. And I was lucky enough to have, I think, quite a strong network to start with, but also it's been hugely effective. But I think that's, it's going to sound really cheesy now, but I wanted a job to be my home, but I actually think I realized that my network was my home. And I've got probably now 5 or 6 people who I didn't really know very well before we started working together, who now, we're WhatsApping each other every couple of weeks about what each of us are up to professionally, sending opportunities, like sharing content. And I feel like I have a professional network of people who are not my colleagues, but who are certainly peers with whom I share a lot of values and interests. And I feel like, if my, I guess I was going to say burn down because it was like the home analogy, but if my place of work burned down tomorrow or my job disappeared tomorrow, I wouldn't feel as I felt, coming back from maternity, which was the sense of being totally adrift, totally at sea. I think I'd be like, well, I've got this network of people who can help me. And the first thing I would do would be to reach out to the, 5 or 6, close peers that I've really kind of cultivated through the networking. But then I also know I've got a much wider network too. So I feel like I've come to a place where I can trust myself about decisions I want to make around my career. But also I've got a lot of people who can catch me if I end up falling through, because it's not about a job to call home, really. It is about seeing myself as a professional with interests and capabilities and as part of a bigger network, almost regardless of what my current job place or title is.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think once you learn how to build relationships, use them to help you address your questions, concerns, fears, support you, I mean, yeah, then you're totally supported and you're not starting from square one if your job was to disappear. Right?
Exactly.
You have this ongoing, living, breathing relationships that really are the ones that are going to steer you in the direction of interesting opportunities. So I love that. Another big theme I had in my notes that I think was big for you in terms of something you needed to unwind from to create this more trust in yourself and this direction that was more authentic and clear for you was kind of unwinding from people pleasing or kind of telling people what they wanted to hear. I know we had a few moments together when we were working together where, well, why don't you talk about this before I put words in your mouth? Like, how do you feel about that and your journey through that?
I feel it's funny with people pleasing because, and particularly, I work in gender equity. I spend a lot of time thinking about gender norms and patting myself on the back for not for not subscribing to them. And the people pleasing thing really surprised me because I think I was like, oh, I don't do that. I'm quite firm. I'm quite clear. I'm, sometimes quite princessy. There are lots of things I don't want to do, and I don't make any bones about it. But while we were working together, I think it was actually fairly early on, a ridiculous opportunity came up, which I will talk about because it is just very funny, which was, a contact got in touch to say that a member of the royal family, the British royal family, was interested in creating a festival of the strawberry for kind of to coincide with Wimbledon and like have a big festival. It was around the time, I guess it was sort of post Brexit thing, and I was intrigued because it felt maybe quite glamorous and silly. And initially I was told it would be like a short engagement, and it would speak to my strengths. But I also probably had a feeling when it was being talked about of, yeah, I could do that. I mean, I don't necessarily want to do that, but I could do it. And like, it sounds, I could, you're asking me, you're a old work contact, and I like you, and you obviously thought I'd be good for this, and so I'm kind of flattered. And so yeah, like I could do that because you want me to do it, and so yeah, I could do it. And I remember when we were talking with one another about it, you were kind of like, but why, why would you say yes to this if it's not really something that you actually, it's not going to lead you anywhere. It's sounds actually like when you uncover it, like it's potentially quite stressful. It's not using the skills or capabilities or kind of industry. It's not in your North Star. Like it's not in your wheelhouse at all, really. This, you could do it, and you would do it maybe as like a favor, or like to have a funny story, which I think was also part of my motivation to do it. But it was really illuminating because I think I had, the thing I could have said on the phone was, thank you so much for thinking of me, but truly, like, this doesn't feel like it's where I'm, where I want to be going professionally, and actually, doesn't necessarily speak to things I want to be doing in my future, even if it is something I could do now. So, thank you for thinking of me, but it's okay. Instead, what I did was I kind of went through a big hoo-ha process of like starting to write a proposal, talking to someone from the royal household about it, and then like stopped and was like, hold on a minute, this is ridiculous. Why am I now spending time and energy and wasting other people's time and energy on something that I know I don't really want to do, and actually, starting to give me a bit of a sinking feeling every time I talk about it or think about it. And that was really kind of eye-opening because I'd never thought of myself as a people pleaser before, but that was a quite extreme and ridiculous example of how. And I think actually we talked about it with one another about how the first place I worked in my career, there was a big, graduates, because it was a graduate scheme, graduates were really encouraged to just say yes all the time. And I had never thought that that was something that had clearly kind of seeped into my bones, but I think it had. And so it was illuminating also to think about, what are some of the received bits of wisdom or kind of ways of being or behavior that I've sort of somehow managed to, make muscle memory. And people pleasing, I think it was so ingrained that I didn't even recognize it. And then it was in talking together about that opportunity, and then also about, the first place I'd worked and how that had been a real people pleasing culture, that I realized, oh yeah, I am a people pleaser. Just a sort of tacit secret one who thought that they had gotten over that a long time ago.
No, I thank you so much for sharing that, because I think it's a really important story I wanted to bring up, because I see this situation a lot with my clients and the types of people I work with. When you are smart and ambitious, especially also in school, right? In school, you don't really get a choice of what coursework you're going to do. I mean, at university, yes, but most of the education system, you're given a set of subjects and your job is to perform, right? And when you are an ambitious, smart, achieving type of person, you're used to just saying, okay, well, what is the thing? And then I will do it well, right?
Yeah.
And not really thinking, do I want to do this? Is this the right thing for me? And so I think that this pattern, often learned in school, and to your point, in your first job, of just saying, I can just figure it out, right? I'm smart and I'm focused and I'm hardworking and I will just do it. And if people want me to do it, I will be successful. I think this is often what gets people tripped up, is not just getting stuff done because you can, instead of listening to what you described as that sinking feeling, right? Of like, I don't actually, which is what I would describe as a no, what a no feels like in your body. For you, it's a
Yes.
sinking feeling. Everyone's going to, physical expression will be slightly different. But, this is a big part of trusting yourself, knowing what a yes feels like versus knowing what a no feels like, and using that as the, do I want to do this or not? Because of course you can do it, right? You're smart and hardworking and achieving. And of course you can build a beautiful festival of the strawberry for the royal family, or, whatever. So funny. And
Could have
we're
happened.
we're recording this just after Charles got coronated, so it's very apt subject
You'll
matter.
notice there were no strawberries as part of that. I think the idea obviously got canned. It didn't happen.
That's because they didn't
So,
have you
had
doing
had
it.
I had the chance to do it, yeah, exactly. Maybe it could have been a huge success.
Yeah, they were like, well, if Sarah's not doing it, we're not going to do the festival of the strawberry.
Exactly.
Anyways, so yeah, I think that it's just such an important nuance. Of course you can do it, but do you want to do it? And I think
Yes.
having that as the mindset shift is a really, really important growth opportunity in creating an energizing, aligned career.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. We've covered on a lot of the stuff I wanted to chat about. Do you feel like there's anything else that was really pivotal for you, or that you've really taken away from our time together, shared with other people, whatever, that you want to chat about?
I think there's something really valuable. I think, you started this conversation by talking about the amount of time it had been since we were working together. And I remember actually one of the things that was really, I think I felt a bit nervous to stop working together. I was like, how will I do this on my own? Anne's been so fantastic. And the career coaching has been such a shift, I think, in my approach to my career. But actually one of the things that I think was so kind of so transformative for me was the work we did around emotions. But I think that work actually only really sunk in the months after we stopped working together. I think it did take like 2 or 3 months for me to kind of, for that to sink in and for me to feel like I knew how to, trust my emotional response and to pay attention to my emotional response. And I think because I'd done therapy, my mother is a therapist, like I think I came into coaching with a real like, oh yeah, well I get this, all these emotional stuff I get elsewhere, and I don't really need to think about this here, and I'm here to have, serious rational conversations about work. I'm not here to talk about my feelings or cry or, ask what that means. That stuff I take really seriously, but I do it in a different forum. But in fact, I think that has been like one of the most, the thing that I practice the most, I suppose, in my work life now is thinking about emotions and the emotional, how to kind of listen to the emotional response that's happening to me in relation to my work, and to not run away from that or be afraid of it or try and suppress it, but instead to really think about, okay, why am I feeling like this? What does this tell me about what's going on for me at work, and how can I use this information about my feelings in a way that then like will enable me to take the right action next? Because I think previously I would have just sort of, you have a difficult day or you have a bad conversation, or something happens at work that generates an emotional response that isn't comfortable, and my previous instinct would have been just to suppress it. And I think because of working together, I've really, and it did take a few months for it to like sink in, but it really did, the sort of paying attention to your emotions and using your emotional responses as really meaningful, valuable information for you about what is and isn't working in your work. That was something that, I was initially like, oh, whatever this, but as ever was one of the more transformative aspects of coaching for me. And it's something I've talked about actually when I've recommended you to friends, or talked about coaching in general. All the things that were the things that I was like, oh, I'm less into this, was of course the stuff that was the most valuable in the end. So, I suppose my plea to anybody listening who's considering coaching, but who has doubts about certain aspects of it, the things that you have doubts about may end up being the things that are the most valuable to you, even if that feels uncomfortable or weird to think about now. That was certainly my experience.
So good. It's so, I mean, the feeling stuff is really, because I mean, look, it's so funny the way that this conversation has unfolded, because I think a lot of people come into this just wanting a new job, right? And like, oh, let's just like help me figure out what it is and interview and prepare and like get the job. And of course, there's lots of structures and coaches that you can work with that will help you do that. But what I have found and the way that I structure my program is that you really, it kind of depends what you're after and what career you want. But if you want to trust yourself and create a career that feels energizing and aligning, you can't do that if you aren't connected to your emotional world. Like the body and the mind have to work together. And once you know what a yes feels like and what a no feels like, this is so much important information. And we aren't really taught intentionally how to feel and how to scan our body for emotions and then allow those emotions and process those emotions fully, and then use the data of those emotions to make decisions. Sometimes you hear about that narrative in society, but you're not ever taught it. So I think really learning that as a skill is essential, and that's what allows you to trust yourself. So yeah, I love that you shared that. And if anyone is like, what is a feeling and how does that work? You should listen to the episode. I think I called it Feelings, Your Overlooked Superpower, but it's maybe like 5 or 6 episodes in from the first episode.
Nice.
Wonderful. I'm so glad that that is working for you. And yeah, all of this stuff works in concert together. So
Absolutely.
yeah, you can't do the rational bit without the emotional bit. So as much as we would just like to be rational robots who just execute, we unfortunately are emotional beings. And so that's an important part of the work. Amazing. Anything else that you wanted to share?
I think only to say it's a lot of the stuff that it's actually a bit like in strategy, which is sort of my, I guess, discipline. One of the things that people always say about good strategies is that as soon as you've said them, they should feel obvious. Like it should feel completely intuitive what the insight is, and kind of, as soon as you relay it to somebody, they should be like, oh yeah, of course. And I think that's been a lot of what has been so successful about a lot of the techniques and a lot of the kind of pillars of the work that we did together, which is it's things that you maybe would not have thought about yourself, but as soon as it's something that you're discussing or thinking about, and as soon as it's something you try, like with, well, I could just write down what I could do and put it in front of my boss and see how she responds. As soon as you give it a try, it's like, oh yeah, it's obvious. Why didn't I do that before? But I think that that's the real strength of it. Like this, there's no sorcery or, mysticism around this stuff. Some of it is obvious and it should feel obvious and it should feel easy as soon as you're able to do it. But that's the strength of it. And that's what means it's something I feel now confident to be able to keep doing again and again on my own, without your support, is because I feel like I've been able to practice the techniques, but also the techniques are not, there's no secret sauce. It is just stuff that as soon as you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, why didn't I try that before? Why wasn't that something that was in my mind? And now I've been sort of supported and nurtured to be able to do it myself. I have no doubt that I'll be able to do it myself in the future. And that's what I think is the real, the real strength, I guess, of the coaching program that we did together, was I've come away from it with all of the skills and capacities to practice it on my own. And that's partly because a lot of the stuff is easy to do. And that's in no small part because it's about being able to, as you said, let go of those limiting beliefs, understand the barriers that are holding you back, try some stuff, and then once you've tried it, kind of reap the fruits of your labor.
It means so much to me that you said that, because obviously I love good strategy. And yeah, that's the whole philosophy, is that when you boil down the noise, there's only these 4 things you need to focus on, and they're pretty fundamental stuff, right? Owning who you are, learning how to have conversations, being intentional with the thoughts you put in your brain, and learning how to manage your time, setting boundaries, getting stuff done. It's all fundamental, right? And so that's why it feels easy, because it's fundamental. But this is often why, we're not taught this in any sort of intentional or structured way. And so when you learn these 4 fundamental concepts and understand the insights and the tools to execute on them is something you can do for the rest of your life. And you'll always be able to trust yourself if you know how to do these kind of 4 concepts. So thank you. Thank you for coming on and chatting.
My pleasure.
Love, always a pleasure to hang out with you. And
Likewise.
looking forward to seeing you in London in a couple months. All right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, if you're ready to create an energizing career you love, one that is simply an extension of who you are and how you want to live your life, then I want to invite you to schedule a consultation. We'll get to the bottom of what's going on for you and exactly where you need to focus to bring your career and life into alignment. It's free. Just head on over to thecareer.studio/schedule to find a time that works for you. Or if you're enjoying and getting value from these episodes, I'd love you to leave a short review on whatever podcast app you use. This helps other people like you find and get value from the podcast too.